When the dust settled, the day Eliza Hart's body finally gave out, she fell face first into the dirt, with a burst sack of flour painting the ground white around her like a shroud. And that's when the stranger rode up the hill and changed everything. This is a story about a widow with 5 starving children, a summer that tried to kill them all, and the silent cowboy who became the only thing standing between her family and complete destruction. If you want to know how love can grow in the driest soil, how a marriage of desperation can become something real, and how sometimes the quietest men make the loudest difference, then stay with me until the end. And please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to Wyoming Territory, 1877, to the day everything changed. The heat didn't just arrive that summer, it invaded. It pushed through the cracks in the sod walls, turned the air thick as wool, and made every breath feel like swallowing sand. Eliza Hart stood in what remained of her vegetable garden, staring at the withered stalks that had once promised beans, and felt the world tilt sideways. 4 months. 4 months since Thomas had been thrown from his horse and broken his neck. 4 months since she'd become a widow with 5 children under the age of 12 and a homestead that was dying faster than she could save it. The flour sack slipped from her hands. She didn't mean to drop it. Her fingers simply stopped working. One moment she was carrying their last 20 pounds of flour from the storage dugout, and the next she was watching it tumble through the air in strange, slow motion, hitting the hard-packed earth with a sound like a body falling. The fabric split. White powder exploded across the dirt in a cloud that caught the brutal sunlight and hung there, suspended, beautiful and terrible all at once. Eliza dropped to her knees. Her hands moved through the flour and dust, trying to salvage something, anything, but it was already mixing with the dirt, becoming mud where her tears fell, becoming nothing. She could hear herself making sounds, small, broken sounds that she couldn't control. "Mama?" The voice came from the doorway of the sod house. Sarah, 8 years old, holding baby Ruthie on her hip like she'd been doing since the funeral. Too young to be a mother, but doing it anyway because there was no choice. Eliza couldn't look at her, couldn't let her daughter see her like this, on her knees in the dirt, covered in their last food supply, crying like the world had ended. Except maybe it had. "Mama, don't cry." Sarah's voice cracked. "We'll be okay. Noah's checking the snares. Maybe he caught something." Noah, her eldest at 12, trying to be the man of the house, with a jaw set too hard and eyes that had forgotten how to be young. He'd been checking those snares every day for a week and caught nothing but grasshoppers and his own frustration. Eliza pressed her flour-covered hands against her face. The heat pressed down on her skull like a physical weight. Inside the house, she could hear James coughing, that wet, rattling cough that had started 2 weeks ago and gotten worse every day, despite the onion poultices, the steam tents, the prayers she no longer believed would be answered. 6 years old. The same age Thomas had been when she'd first held him. James had his father's eyes, his father's stubborn chin, his father's way of trying to smile even when he was scared, and his lungs were filling with something she couldn't fight. "Mama, please get up." But Eliza's body had other ideas. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. The world grayed at the edges. When was the last time she'd eaten a full meal? 3 days? 4? She'd been giving her portions to the children, telling them she'd eaten earlier, watching them believe her because they needed to. The ground came up to meet her. She was vaguely aware of Sarah screaming, of running feet, of small hands trying to pull her up. But her body had finally, absolutely, completely reached its limit. This is it, she thought distantly. This is where it ends. Not in childbirth like her mother, not in a riding accident like Thomas, but in the dirt, under the killing sun, surrounded by spilled flour and failed crops and children she couldn't feed. Then she heard something that didn't belong. Hoofbeats. They cut through the buzz of cicadas and the sound of Sarah's frightened crying, steady, purposeful, getting closer. Eliza managed to turn her head, her cheek pressed against the hot dirt, flour paste drying on her skin. Through the haze of heat shimmer, she saw him. A rider coming up the long slope to her homestead. Not riding fast, but not slow either. Just steady, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and wasn't in any particular hurry to get there, but would arrive just the same. The horse was a big bay gelding, the kind built for mountains and hard work. The man sat easy in the saddle, broad-shouldered and still, his hat pulled low against the sun. He wasn't from town. She would have recognized him, and he wasn't a drifter. Everything about his gear spoke of permanence, of care, of a man who maintained his equipment because his life depended on it. He pulled up 20 feet from where she lay, and for a long moment he just sat there looking down at her. Eliza couldn't see his eyes beneath the hat brim, but she felt the weight of his gaze. "Ma'am." His voice was low, rough-edged, like gravel under water. "You hurt?" Eliza tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Sarah answered for her, her voice high with fear. "She just fell. She was carrying the flour, and she just fell down." The man swung down from his horse with the kind of economy that spoke of decades in the saddle. He was tall, very tall, and when he pushed his hat back, Eliza saw a face carved from hard weather and harder years, maybe 40, maybe older, a jaw dark with several days' stubble, lines around his eyes from squinting into too many suns, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But his eyes were clear, gray-blue, like storm clouds over mountains. And when they settled on her, they weren't assessing her as a woman. They were reading her like a piece of country, noting the danger signs, the points of failure, the things that needed immediate attention. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Eliza's voice came out as a rasp. "I'm fine. Just the heat." He made a sound that might have been disagreement. Then he turned to Sarah. "You got water in that house?" Sarah nodded, still clutching Ruthie so hard the baby squirmed. "Get me a cup. And a wet cloth." Sarah hesitated, looking at her mother. Eliza managed a tiny nod. The girl ran. The man crouched beside Eliza, his movements careful, like he was approaching a spooked animal. "I'm going to help you sit up. That all right?" She wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him she didn't need help, that she could do this herself, that she'd been doing everything herself for 4 months, and she was fine, just fine, always fine. Instead, she whispered, "Yes." His hands were careful. He slid one arm behind her shoulders and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her against his bent knees so she wasn't lying flat anymore. The world spun, then steadied. This close, she could smell him, horse and leather and sweat, but clean sweat, honest work. And something else. Wood smoke, pine, mountain air. Sarah came running back with a tin cup sloshing water and a rag that might have been a dish towel once. The man took them both, wrung out the cloth, and pressed it to the back of Eliza's neck. The coolness was shocking. She gasped, "Easy." His voice was quiet. "Just breathe. You're dehydrated. Heat exhaustion, probably. When's the last time you drank?" Eliza couldn't remember. This morning? Yesterday? She'd been giving the water to James, trying to keep his fever down, trying to help him breathe. The man held the cup to her lips. Small sips, not too fast. She drank. The water was tepid, but tasted like salvation. He let her have 3 swallows, then pulled the cup back. "More in a minute," he said. "Too much too fast and you'll just bring it back up." He was right, of course. She could feel her stomach cramping around what she'd already taken. She closed her eyes, trying to will her body to cooperate, to be strong, to not fall apart in front of this stranger and her terrified daughter. "You got more children?" the man asked Sarah. "Yes, sir. 4 more. Noah's checking traps. Mary and Benjamin are inside with James. James is sick." Something flickered across the man's face. "What kind of sick?" "He coughs all the time. He can't breathe good, and he's real hot." The man's jaw tightened. He looked down at Eliza. "How long?" 2 weeks. Her voice was stronger now. The water was helping. "Started as a summer cold. Got worse." "You had a doctor look at him?" "Can't afford it." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then he stood, still holding Eliza steady with one hand. "I'm going to take you inside, get you out of this sun. Then I'm going to look at your boy. That acceptable to you?" Eliza wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, of independence. But James's cough echoed from inside the house, wet and desperate, and she knew she was out of options. "Yes," she whispered. He lifted her like she was made of paper. Sarah made a small sound of surprise, but Eliza barely registered it. She was too focused on not passing out, on breathing, on trying to understand how her life had come to this, being carried by a stranger into her own house because she couldn't walk there herself. The sod house was marginally cooler than outside, but only just. The man had to duck to get through the doorway. Inside, Mary and Benjamin looked up from where they sat on the floor near James's pallet, their faces identical masks of fear. The man set Eliza carefully on the bench near the table, making sure she could sit upright. Then he turned to look at the room. Eliza saw it through his eyes and felt shame burn through her exhaustion. The dirt floor, the sagging roof beams, the few pieces of rough furniture, the nearly empty shelves, the corner where James lay on a thin pallet, his small chest working too hard with each breath. This wasn't a home. It was barely a shelter. The man removed his hat and hung it on a peg, then walked to where James lay. He knelt beside the boy, his big frame folding with surprising grace. "Hey there, son. I'm Caleb. What's your name?" James's eyes opened. They were fever bright. "James?" he whispered, then coughed, a deep, racking sound that shook his whole body. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw his hands tighten slightly. He placed one broad palm on James's forehead, then his chest, feeling the heat, the rapid heartbeat, the labored breathing. "How's the coughing been at night?" "Worse," Eliza said. "He can't lie flat. And there's stuff coming up, yellow stuff." Caleb nodded, his face grim. He stayed there for a long moment, his hand on James's chest, and Eliza realized he was counting breaths, counting heartbeats. Finally, he stood and walked back to her. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that the children couldn't hear. "He needs a doctor, today. His lungs are half full of fluid and his fever's too high. Another day or two in this heat, and you'll lose him." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known James was sick, had known it was serious, but hearing it said out loud, in that flat, certain voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I can't afford—" "I can." Eliza's head snapped up. "What?" Caleb met her eyes steadily. "I can afford it. I'll take him to Doc Harrison in town. You can pay me back when you're able, or not. Doesn't matter much to me either way." I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's common sense. Boy needs help. I can provide it. Simple as that." "You don't even know us." Something flickered in those storm cloud eyes. "No, ma'am. But I know what it looks like when someone's drowning, and I know I've got a rope. Seems foolish not to throw it." Before Eliza could respond, the door banged open and Noah burst in, wild-eyed and holding a knife he'd clearly grabbed in a hurry. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing to my mother?" "Noah!" Eliza tried to stand, but Caleb's hand on her shoulder kept her seated. "It's all right," Caleb said calmly, turning to face the boy. "I'm Caleb Rourke. Your mother collapsed outside. I stopped to help." Noah's eyes darted from Caleb to his mother to James's pallet. The knife didn't lower. "We don't need your help. Get out." "Noah," Eliza started. "I said get out." Noah's voice cracked. "We're fine. We don't need anybody." Caleb studied the boy for a long moment. 12 years old, all wild fear and desperate pride, trying so hard to be a man that he'd forgotten how to be a child. The knife in his hand was shaking. "Your brother's dying," Caleb said, his voice still calm but with an edge now that cut through the room. "You can hate me all you want. You can tell yourself you don't need help until you're blue in the face. But in 2 days, maybe 3, that boy is going to stop breathing, and there won't be a damn thing you can do about it. So you can either let me take him to town and get him a doctor, or you can stand there with that knife and explain to your mother why your pride was more important than your brother's life." The silence that followed was absolute. Noah's face crumpled. The knife clattered to the floor, and then he was crying, great gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. And Eliza was moving before she knew it, crossing the room to pull him into her arms. "It's okay," she whispered into his hair. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. It hadn't been okay for a long time. Over Noah's shaking shoulders, she met Caleb's eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. Then he turned to Sarah. You got any food in this house? Some cornmeal, a little bacon grease. That all? Sarah nodded, her eyes too wide in her thin face. Caleb walked to the door and picked up his saddlebags. When he came back inside, he unpacked them methodically. Hard bread, dried beef, coffee, a small sack of beans, 2 tins of peaches. Provisions that would have cost more than Eliza had seen in cash money in 6 months. This should hold you for a few days, he said. Sarah, can you make coffee? Yes, sir. Good. Make some, strong. Your mother needs food and water. He looked at Mary and Benjamin, who were still frozen by James's pallet. You two hungry? 2 solemn nods. All right then, let's get some food in, everybody, before I take James to town. He moved through the house like he'd been there 100 times before, finding the coffee pot, building up the fire, slicing bread with a knife from his belt that looked sharp enough to shave with. The children watched him with a mixture of wariness and wonder. Noah had stopped crying but stayed pressed against Eliza's side. She could feel him trembling. Is he really going to die? Noah whispered. Eliza wanted to lie, wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but she'd lost her husband 4 months ago, had spent every day since then lying to her children about how much food they had, how safe they were, how tomorrow would be better. She was tired of lying. I don't know, she said honestly, but Mr. Rourke is right. He needs a doctor. We can't do this alone anymore. We don't know him. No, but he stopped. And that's more than anyone else has done. It was true. In 4 months, not one neighbor had come to check on them. Not one person from town had offered help. Thomas Hart's widow and her children had become invisible, or worse, an embarrassment, a reminder of how quickly prosperity could turn to poverty. Caleb set a cup of hot coffee in front of her. Drink slow. Eliza wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. When she sipped, it was bitter and strong and exactly what she needed. While the children ate, carefully, like they were afraid the food would disappear if they moved too fast, Caleb went back outside. Through the door, Eliza could see him examining the homestead with the same careful attention he'd given James. The failing crops, the sagging barn, the dried-up well. He came back in looking thoughtful. How long since you had water from that well? 3 weeks. It's been drying up since June. Where are you getting water now? There's a creek about a mile south. Noah and I carry it. Caleb's jaw tightened. A mile, each way, in this heat, carrying water for 7 people. I'm going to take James now, he said. It's a 2-hour ride to town. I'll be back tomorrow with medicine and whatever else the doc says he needs. You don't have to come back, Eliza said. If you can just take him to town, I'm coming back. Mr. Rourke, it's Caleb. And I'm coming back because you've got a sick boy, no water, no food, and you're about 1 day away from heat stroke yourself. So I'm taking James, getting him help, and then I'm coming back to figure out how to keep the rest of you alive until this heat breaks. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Then why? The question burst out of her, sharp with exhaustion and confusion and too much emotion to contain. Why are you doing this? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and complicated and carefully buried. Because someone should have stopped for me once, he said quietly, and nobody did. Then he turned and gently lifted James from his pallet. The boy didn't resist, too weak to do anything but rest his hot head against Caleb's shoulder. I'll take care of him, Caleb said. I give you my word. And somehow, impossibly, Eliza believed him. She walked outside with him, her legs still shaky but holding. The other children followed, clustering around her like baby birds. Caleb settled James carefully on his horse, then swung up behind him, arranging the boy so he was secure against his chest. In the brutal sunlight, they looked like a study in contrast, the big, weathered man and the small, sick child. There's more food in those saddlebags, Caleb said, and a canteen. Make sure everybody drinks. I'll be back tomorrow, midday. He started to turn his horse, then paused. Mrs. Hart, your boy Noah. He's got good instincts. You should be proud of him. Then he rode away, down the long slope, carrying her son toward town in hope and help that Eliza had stopped believing existed. She stood there until they disappeared from view, her remaining children pressed against her sides, the spilled flowers still white against the dark earth. For the first time in 4 months, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this. The heat pressed down. The cicadas sang. And somewhere in the distance, Eliza thought she heard the rumble of thunder, promising rain that might never come. But Caleb Rourke had come instead. And that, it turned out, was enough for one day. Sarah tugged her sleeve. "Mama, is James going to be okay?" Eliza looked down at her daughter's upturned face, at the hope and fear warring there, and made a choice. She could lie, the way she'd been lying for months. Or she could trust that sometimes, when you've fallen as far as you can fall, the only direction left is up. "I think he might be," she said softly. "I really think he might be." And for the first time since Thomas died, that didn't feel like a lie at all. The sun had moved 3 fingers across the sky by the time Eliza got the children settled inside. Sarah had taken charge of the coffee pot, brewing another batch with the precious grounds Caleb had left, while Noah paced the perimeter of the house like a caged animal, his eyes constantly drawn to the empty horizon where the stranger had disappeared with James. Eliza understood the restlessness. Her own heart kept lurching between hope and terror, unable to settle on either. She'd sent her sick child off with a man whose last name she barely knew, a man who could be anyone, who could do anything. The rational part of her mind screamed that she'd been reckless, desperate, foolish. But the other part, the part that had felt those careful hands lift her from the dirt, had seen the way he'd looked at James with something like recognition. That part whispered that maybe, just maybe, she'd done the only right thing in 4 months of wrong choices. "Mama, you should eat something." Mary appeared at her elbow, holding a piece of the bread Caleb had sliced. The girl was 9, caught in that awkward space between childhood and the premature adulthood that poverty demanded. "You haven't had anything since yesterday." Had it only been yesterday? Time had become strange, elastic, each day stretching into eternity, while the weeks blurred together into one long exercise in survival. Eliza took the bread. It was good bread, dense and filling, the kind you didn't waste on air and hopes. She chewed slowly, forcing herself to swallow despite the knot in her throat. "Where do you think he took James?" Benjamin asked. He was 7, small for his age, with Thomas's dark hair and a tendency towards silence that had gotten more pronounced since the funeral. "To the doctor?" "That's what he said he'd do," Eliza replied, keeping her voice steady. "And I believe him." "Why?" Noah's question came sharp from the doorway. "Because he gave us some food? Because he said pretty words? Pa used to say, never trust a man who appears out of nowhere with easy answers." "Your pa also said that sometimes you have to take a chance on people's better nature," Eliza countered, gently. "And right now, James doesn't have time for us to be cautious." Noah's jaw worked, the muscle jumping beneath the sun-darkened skin. At 12, he was already tall, already carrying the kind of lean strength that came from hard work and not enough food. He'd been trying so hard to fill his father's boots that Eliza had watched him disappear into the effort piece by piece, until sometimes she looked at him and couldn't find her boy anymore. "I should have been here," he said, his voice rough. "I should have been here when you fell. You were doing exactly what I asked you to do, checking the traps, trying to find food. None of this is your fault, Noah." "Then whose fault is it?" The words burst out of him. "Pa's dead, we're starving. James is sick, and now some stranger shows up and we're supposed to just, what, trust him? Let him fix everything?" Eliza set down the bread and crossed to her son. She took his face in her hands, feeling the stubble just beginning to show on his jaw, seeing the tears he was fighting so hard not to shed. "We're supposed to accept help when it's offered," she said quietly. "And we're supposed to have faith that sometimes people do good things just because they can. Your father believed that. I still do. And I need you to believe it too, just for today." Noah's breath hitched. For a moment, she saw him as he really was. Not a miniature man, but a scared boy who'd lost his father and was terrified of losing everything else. "What if he doesn't come back?" Noah whispered. "Then we'll figure out what comes next, like we've been doing all along. But I think he will." "How do you know?" Eliza thought about the way Caleb had moved through their house, the careful competence in every gesture, the absence of pity in those storm cloud eyes. She thought about what he'd said. because someone should have stopped for me once. And nobody did. Because he gave his word, she said, and I don't think he's the kind of man who breaks it. The afternoon crawled by with the speed of cooling honey. Eliza tried to rest, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw James's fever-bright face, heard that terrible rattling cough. Sarah kept the younger children occupied with a storytelling game, making up tales about brave cowboys and magical horses to keep their minds off their empty stomachs and missing brother. Noah disappeared outside and didn't come back for 2 hours. When he finally returned, his hands were blistered and bloody. "What did you do?" Eliza demanded, reaching for his hands. He pulled away. "The well. I went down into it, tried to dig deeper, see if I could find more water." "Noah, that's dangerous. We need water, Ma. You heard him. We can't keep hauling it a mile each way in this heat. I thought maybe if I could just dig a little deeper." "And did you find any?" His silence was answer enough. Eliza pulled him to the table and cleaned his hands with water from the precious canteen Caleb had left. The blisters were bad, some already broken and weeping. She wrapped them in strips torn from one of her few remaining petticoats, working with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd been bandaging wounds since her children learned to walk. "You can't fix everything by yourself," she said as she tied off the last bandage. "Neither can you." She met his eyes and saw her own stubborn pride reflected back at her. "No," she agreed. "I can't. That's why I'm learning to accept help. From strangers. From anyone who offers it." Night fell like a blessing, bringing relief from the murderous heat. Eliza gathered the children close, all of them squeezed onto the 2 narrow beds because no one wanted to sleep alone with James gone and everything feeling uncertain. She sang them the old songs her mother had taught her, songs about rivers and mountains, and homes that existed more in memory than reality. When they finally slept, she slipped outside. The night sky was enormous, stars scattered like flour across black cloth. Somewhere out there, James was sleeping too. She had to believe that. Sleeping in a real bed, in a cool room, being tended by someone who knew how to fight the sickness that was trying to claim him. And Caleb Rourke, where was he tonight? Camped somewhere on the trail back, already back to wherever he came from, having done his good deed and moved on? Eliza sat on the step and let herself cry, quietly, where the children couldn't hear. She cried for Thomas, who'd been a good man and hadn't deserved to die at 33 with so much left unfinished. She cried for her children, who were learning to be hungry and scared and strong in ways children shouldn't have to learn. She cried for herself, for the woman she'd been before, the one who'd believed in happy endings and providence and the basic goodness of the world. She was still there when the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, turning it the color of old roses. Morning brought no relief from the heat. By mid-morning, it was already brutal, the sun climbing toward its zenith with malicious intent. Eliza kept the children inside, the sod walls providing at least some protection from the worst of it. They ate sparingly from Caleb's provisions, each bite measured against the possibility that he might not return, that they'd need to make this food last for weeks instead of days. Noah watched the road constantly, his body tight with vigilance. "It's only been 1 day," Eliza reminded him. "He said midday. It's almost midday. He had to ride to town, see the doctor, get medicine, ride back. That takes time." But she was watching the road too, her heart in her throat. The sun reached its peak. Noon passed. The afternoon stretched toward 2 o'clock, then 3. "He's not coming," Noah said flatly. "He took James, and he's not coming back." "Noah, no, Ma. Face it. We trusted him, and he—" "There." Sarah's voice cut through the argument. She was at the window, pressed against the frame. "There's dust on the road." They all rushed to look. Sure enough, a cloud of dust was rising from the southern approach, backlit by the afternoon sun. For a long moment, it was impossible to tell if it was one rider or two, if it was friend or stranger or nothing at all. Then the dust cleared enough to see him. Caleb Rourke, riding that same big bay gelding, his hat pulled low. And in front of him, bundled in what looked like a blanket, was a small figure that had to be James. Eliza was moving before she knew it, out the door and into the killing heat, running down the slope with her skirts hiked up and her heart hammering against her ribs. The children poured out behind her, a wave of hope, and desperate need. Caleb pulled up and dismounted in one smooth motion, turning to lift James down. The boy was awake, truly awake, his eyes clear in a way they hadn't been for days. "Mama!" James's voice was hoarse but strong enough to carry. Eliza caught him as Caleb handed him down, wrapping him in her arms and feeling the difference immediately. He was still warm, but it was normal warmth, not the terrifying fever heat of yesterday. His breathing was easier. When he coughed, it was dry, unproductive, nothing like the wet rattle that had kept her awake for 2 weeks. "You're better," she whispered into his hair. "Oh God, you're better." Doc Harrison gave him medicine, Caleb said, pulling a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebag. Tincture of ipecac to clear his lungs, willow bark tea for the fever, and some kind of vapor rub for his chest. He's not cured, but the doctor says he'll make it if he gets rest and decent food and stays out of this heat. Eliza looked up at him, James still clutched in her arms, and couldn't find words big enough to contain what she felt. "Thank you," she managed. There's no way to thank you." Caleb's expression didn't change. "He's a brave kid. Didn't complain once, even when the doc was working on him. You should be proud." "Did you stay in town?" Noah asked, his voice still edged with suspicion. "Got a room at the boarding house. Made sure James was stable before I bedded down. Left at first light this morning." He pulled another package from his saddlebags, this one considerably larger. "Brought more supplies, and I had a conversation with the mercantile owner about extending you credit." "I told you, I can't afford—" "He's extending it anyway. Said he knew your husband. Said Thomas Hart was a good man, and he was ashamed he hadn't checked on you sooner. You can settle up when the crops come in, or next year, or whenever. He's not worried about it." Eliza stared at him. "You did that? You went to the mercantile and—" "Seemed foolish to bring the boy back to a house with no food," Caleb said, his voice matter of fact. "And I might have mentioned that you've got 5 children to feed and a homestead to run by yourself. Shame's a powerful motivator in a small town. Sometimes folks just need reminding about what's right." He swung back into his saddle, and Eliza felt a spike of panic. "Wait, you're leaving?" "Got to get back to my place before dark. It's a good 3-hour ride from here." "But—" She didn't know what she wanted to say. Stay? Help us? Don't leave us alone again? All of it seemed too much, too desperate, too revealing of just how close to the edge they really were. Caleb seemed to read her face anyway. He shifted in the saddle, his expression thoughtful. "How's your well situation?" he asked. "The same. Dry." He looked past her to the homestead, taking in the failed crops, the sagging structures, the general air of barely controlled collapse. Something moved in his eyes, some calculation or decision. "I'll be back day after tomorrow," he said. "Early. I'm going to bring some equipment, take a proper look at that well. Might be able to do something about it." "Mr. Rourke, Caleb, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to, but that boy needs clean water close by if he's going to heal proper, and you can't keep hauling it a mile in this heat." He looked at Noah. "Your ma's right about you. Good instincts. But you went about it wrong. You don't dig a dry well deeper. You dig where the water wants to be." Noah's face flushed, but he didn't look away. "How do you find where the water wants to be?" "I'll show you. Day after tomorrow." Caleb touched his hat brim. "Mrs. Hart. Children." "Wait!" Sarah darted forward, holding something in her hand. When she got close enough, Eliza saw it was a small cloth bundle. "I made biscuits. From the flour you brought. I thought maybe you'd want some, for your ride home." Something shifted in Caleb's face. For just a moment, the careful blankness cracked, and Eliza saw something raw underneath. Surprise, maybe? Or the kind of emotion that comes from going so long without small kindnesses that you forget what they feel like. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly, accepting the bundle. "That's real thoughtful of you." Then he was riding away, back down the long slope, his shadow stretched long by the afternoon sun. This time, Eliza didn't watch until he disappeared. She had James to tend to, medicine to organize, a sick child who needed food and water and rest. But as she carried her son back to the house, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. The next 2 days passed in a strange suspended state, like the moment between lightning and thunder when you're waiting for the world to catch up. James improved steadily, his cough diminishing, his appetite returning. Eliza followed Doc Harrison's instructions religiously. The vapor rub morning and night, the willow bark tea every 4 hours, rest in the coolest corner of the house they could manage. Noah split his time between tending the few remaining crops and standing guard at the window, watching the road. He didn't say he was waiting for Caleb, but Eliza knew her son well enough to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept tracking south. "He'll come," she told him on the second morning. "You sound pretty sure about that." "I am." "Why? Because he brought James back. That doesn't mean he'll keep coming back. Most people don't." Eliza set down the mending she'd been working on, one of Benjamin's shirts, patched so many times there was more patch than original fabric. "No, most people don't, but I don't think Caleb Rourke is most people." "What is he then?" It was a good question. What did she know about him, really? That he was tall and weathered and moved like violence was always an option, but never a first choice. That he'd spent money he didn't owe on a child he didn't know. That he spoke carefully, like words were a limited resource not to be wasted. That something in his past had taught him what it felt like to need help and not receive it. "I think he's someone who knows what it's like to be alone," Eliza said finally. "And I think he's decided not to leave other people in that place if he can help it." Noah was quiet for a long moment. "Pa would have liked him." "Yes," Eliza agreed softly. "I think he would have." The sound of hoofbeats brought them both to the door. Sure enough, Caleb was approaching, his horse loaded down with equipment that clanked and rattled with each step. Behind him, tied to his saddle, came a second horse, a gray mare with a gentle eye and equipment of her own. "Morning," he called as he dismounted. "Brought some help." But by help, he apparently meant half a hardware store's worth of tools, picks, shovels, buckets, rope, some kind of metal contraption Eliza didn't recognize, and what looked like several sections of wooden pipe. "How's the boy?" Caleb asked, unloading with practiced efficiency. "Better, much better. The medicine worked." "Good." He pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead. Even this early, the heat was oppressive. "I'm going to need your strongest child to help with the well, and someone to manage the water buckets once we get going." "I'll help," Noah said immediately, stepping forward. Caleb studied him, taking in the bandaged hands. "Those from digging the other day?" Noah nodded, his jaw set defensively. "All right then, but you work smart today, not hard. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, Caleb and Noah disappearing into the depths of the well while Sarah and Mary managed a bucket brigade, hauling up the debris as they dug. Eliza watched from the doorway, James asleep against her shoulder, and tried to make sense of what was happening. A stranger had ridden into their lives 3 days ago and was now, apparently, rebuilding their well, for no reason she could identify beyond his own sense of what was right. It defied every lesson she'd learned in 4 months of crushing isolation, every moment of watching her neighbors look away rather than acknowledge her existence. "Why us?" she'd asked that morning, unable to help herself. Caleb had paused in his unloading, considering the question with his usual careful attention. "Why not you?" he'd replied. Now, hours later, she heard a shout from the well. Caleb's head appeared over the rim, streaked with dirt, but wearing an expression that might have been satisfaction. "Found it," he called. "Good strong vein, maybe 15 feet down. We'll need to set the pipe, but you should have water by tonight." The children cheered. Even Noah smiled, a real smile that made him look 12 again instead of 40. By sunset, water was flowing, clear, cold, miraculous water that came up with just a few pumps of the new handle Caleb had installed. The children took turns working the pump, delighting in the splash and sparkle, drinking until their bellies were full for the first time in weeks. Eliza stood back and watched, her throat tight. When Caleb came to stand beside her, covered in dirt and sweat and looking more exhausted than she'd seen him, she didn't know what to say. "You did this," she managed finally. "We did it. Noah's got good instincts once you point him in the right direction. Kid's stronger than he looks. I can't repay you for this. Didn't ask you to. But, Mrs. Hart," he turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to really hear it. You don't owe me. Not for the doctor, not for the food, not for the well. I did these things because they needed doing and I could do them. That's all. No debt, no obligation, no strings. Everyone has strings, Eliza said quietly. Nobody does something for nothing. Then maybe I'm nobody. He picked up his hat, dusting it against his leg. I should head out. It's a long ride home. Stay. The word was out before she could think better of it. Please, it's too late to ride 3 hours. And we have food now, the supplies from town. I can make a proper meal. It's the least I can do. Caleb hesitated, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he looked at the children clustered around the well, at Noah showing Benjamin how the pump mechanism worked, at Sarah's smile as she splashed water on Mary's face. All right, he said, but just tonight. Eliza cooked the first real meal they'd had in weeks. Beans and bacon and cornbread made with ingredients from the mercantile, coffee strong enough to strip paint. The children ate until they couldn't hold any more, their faces flushed with food and happiness and the simple miracle of not being hungry. Caleb sat at the head of the table, Thomas's place, though no one mentioned it, and answered the children's endless questions with patient good humor. Where did he live? Up in the high country about 20 miles north. Did he have a family? No, just himself. What did he do? Raised horses mostly, trapped in winter, kept to himself. Don't you get lonely? Mary asked, her voice curious rather than pitying. Caleb considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but lonely's better than hurt, in my experience, and there's a lot of ways to be hurt when you let people too close. But there's good ways too, Sarah said. Mama says loneliness is just love with nowhere to go. Eliza felt her face flush. I said that a long time ago. I'm not sure I still believe it. I think maybe you should, Caleb said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. Seems like a good thing to believe. After dinner, Eliza spread blankets for him by the door, the coolest spot in the house, with what little breeze there was passing through. The children settled in their usual spots, James breathing easy for the first time in weeks, and slowly the house fell quiet. Eliza lay awake long after everyone else was sleeping, listening to the unfamiliar sound of another adult breathing in the darkness. It should have felt strange, unsettling, maybe even dangerous. Instead, it felt like safety, like they weren't quite so alone anymore. Morning came too soon. Caleb was up before dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. Eliza rose too, building up the fire to make coffee. They didn't speak as she worked, the silence comfortable in the way that comes from understanding rather than awkwardness. When she handed him a cup, their fingers brushed, and Eliza felt something sharp and unexpected jolt through her. Thank you, Caleb said, for the meal, for the hospitality. Thank you for everything else. He nodded, sipping the coffee. Then, I meant what I said. You don't owe me. But if you need help, real help, not just emergency rescue, I'm not that far away. And I could use some help myself come fall. Horses need breaking, fences need mending. Work that pays decent if you've got someone willing to do it. Noah? Eliza said immediately. He's strong, and he learns fast. I was thinking of you, actually. She blinked. Me? You know how to work. You're not afraid of hard things. And from what I've seen, you could use steady income more than you could use pride. He set down the coffee cup. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. Then he was gathering his gear, loading his horses, preparing to leave. The children stumbled out to say goodbye, still half asleep but determined not to miss him. Thank you for fixing our well, Benjamin said solemnly. Thank you for helping James, Mary added. Thank you for the food, Sarah said. Noah stood apart, his arms crossed, but when Caleb extended his hand, the boy took it. They shook once, firm, man to man. You did good work yesterday, Caleb told him. Your pa would be proud. Noah's throat worked. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then Caleb was mounted, looking down at them from the saddle. This strange, quiet man who had ridden into their lives and changed everything without seeming to try. Mrs. Hart, he said, you've got my word. Anything you need, you send word. I'll come. How? She asked. I don't even know where you live. Ask in town for the Rourke place. Anybody can tell you. He touched his hat brim. Take care of each other. He rode away into the rising sun, And this time, when he disappeared over the horizon, Eliza felt the loss like a physical thing. But the well still worked. James was still healing. They had food in the house, and credit at the store, and the knowledge that somewhere, not too far away, there was someone who would come if they called. It wasn't everything, but it was something, and for the first time in 4 months, something felt like enough. "Mama?" Sarah tugged her sleeve. "Is he going to come back?" Eliza looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, thought about Caleb's steady eyes and careful promises, about the way he'd worked alongside her son and fixed what was broken without asking for anything in return. "Yes," she said, "I think he will." And deep in her heart, in a place she'd thought had died with Thomas, she found she believed it. 3 weeks passed before Eliza saw Caleb again, and in that time, the world shifted on its axis in ways both small and profound. James recovered fully, his lungs clear, and his energy returning in bounds that left Eliza exhausted just watching him race around the homestead with Benjamin. The well continued to produce clean, cold water that seemed like a miracle every time she worked the pump, and the credit at the mercantile meant they ate, not abundantly, but consistently, without the gnawing anxiety that had become their constant companion. But something else had changed too, something harder to name. Eliza found herself watching the southern road more often than she should, her hands pausing in their work, her attention drifting. She told herself it was simple gratitude, natural curiosity about the man who'd helped them. But in the quiet moments before sleep, she admitted a harder truth. She missed him, missed the steady competence of his presence, the way he'd move through their crisis without drama or expectation, missed feeling like they weren't entirely alone in the world. Noah noticed, of course. Her eldest saw everything, filed it away behind those watchful eyes that had learned too young to look for danger. "You're thinking about him again," he said one morning, finding her at the window. Eliza didn't bother denying it. "He said to send word if we needed anything. I'm trying to decide if we do. We're managing." "We are. But managing isn't the same as thriving." She turned to face her son. "What he said about work, about paying work come fall. We should consider it." Noah's jaw tightened. "You want to work for him." "I want to feed my children without charity, and he offered honest work for honest pay. That's different from handouts." "Is it? Or is it just another way of being obligated to him?" The question stung because Eliza had asked herself the same thing 100 times. But she'd also spent 4 months watching her children grow thinner, watching opportunities slip away because she had no money and no prospects, watching the homestead decay around them like a body giving up piece by piece. "I'm obligated to you," she said quietly, "to your brothers and sisters, to giving you a life that's more than just survival. If that means accepting help from someone willing to give it, then I'll swallow my pride and do what needs doing." Before Noah could respond, Mary came running from the direction of the road, her face flushed and excited. "Mama, there's a buggy coming, a fancy one." Eliza's heart jumped, half hope, half dread. But when the vehicle came into view, it wasn't Caleb's utilitarian horse and pack gear. It was a polished black carriage pulled by matched bays, the kind of conveyance that spoke of money and social standing and everything Eliza's life had stopped being the day Thomas died. The driver pulled up in front of the house, and when the door opened, Eliza's blood turned to ice. Reverend Silas Hartwell stepped down, immaculate in dark broadcloth despite the heat, his silver hair perfectly groomed beneath his hat. Thomas's older brother, the man who delivered the eulogy at the funeral and then disappeared back to his prosperous parish in Cheyenne without offering a word of practical help. "Eliza." His voice was smooth, cultured, carrying the kind of authority that came from years in the pulpit. "I hope I'm not intruding." She found her voice, though it came out harder than she intended. "Silas, this is unexpected. I apologize for not visiting sooner. Church business has kept me occupied." His eyes swept over the homestead, taking in the threadbare condition of everything, the children clustered warily behind their mother. "But I've been hearing troubling reports, and I felt it was my duty to investigate." "Reports?" Eliza kept her voice level. "What kind of reports?" "That you've been struggling, that the children are living in difficult circumstances, that you've been accepting assistance from strangers." His gaze sharpened. Is it true a man has been staying here? Unaccompanied? The implication hit like a slap. Eliza felt Noah tense beside her, felt her own anger spike hot and immediate. A man helped us when no one else would, she said, her voice cold. He brought medicine for James when he was dying. He fixed our well when we had no water. And he left respectably both times, having asked for nothing in return. I'm sure his intentions seemed pure. Silas's tone dripped with condescension. But you must understand how it appears. A widow, living alone with children, entertaining male visitors. Entertaining? The word came out sharp as broken glass. We were starving, Silas. James was dying of pneumonia. Where were you when we needed help? Where was your Christian charity when your own nieces and nephews were going hungry? Something flickered across Silas's face. Anger, perhaps, or wounded pride. I was unaware of the severity of your situation. If you had reached out, I wrote you, twice. You never responded. I receive a great deal of correspondence. From your dead brother's wife begging for help? Eliza stepped forward, her fear transforming into fury. What kind of shepherd ignores letters like that? Silas's expression hardened. The kind who understands that sometimes harsh circumstances are meant to teach us humility, to show us our proper place. Thomas made poor choices, Eliza. He took on more than he could manage, and now you're reaping the consequences of his pride. Noah moved like a striking snake, lunging forward with his fists clenched, but Eliza caught his arm. Don't, she said quietly. He's not worth it. Listen to your mother, boy. Silas's voice dripped with false concern. Violence only proves my point about the environment these children are being raised in. What do you want, Silas? Eliza asked. You didn't come all this way just to insult my husband's memory. I came because I have a responsibility to my brother's children, and I can see they're not being properly cared for. He pulled a folded document from his coat. I've been in contact with the territorial court. Given the circumstances, your poverty, your association with questionable individuals, the clearly inadequate living conditions, I've petitioned for custody of all 5 children. The world stopped. Eliza heard the words, understood their meaning, but couldn't quite make her mind accept them as real. Take her children. He wanted to take her children. You can't. Her voice came out as a whisper. They're mine. I'm their mother. You're a destitute widow who can barely feed them. Look at this place, Eliza. He gestured at the sagging homestead. Look at these children. They're practically wild. They need proper schooling, proper guidance, proper opportunities. I can provide all of that. In exchange for what? Noah demanded. What do you really want? Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. To do right by my brother's memory, to ensure his children don't grow up in squalor. You never cared about us when Pa was alive, Noah spat. You thought he was a fool for homesteading. You said he'd never make anything of himself out here. And I was proven correct, wasn't I? Silas's voice turned sharp. Your father died broke and left you nothing but debt and dust. If that's not failure, I don't know what is. Eliza's hand cracked across his face before she could stop herself. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, sharp and final. Silas touched his reddening cheek, his expression coldly satisfied. Violent tendencies, unstable emotions. This will all be noted in my report to the judge. Get off my property. This property? Silas laughed, a bitter sound. You're 3 months behind on the claim fees. You'll lose it by autumn anyway. At least let me save the children from watching you fail completely. He climbed back into his carriage, but before the driver could move, he leaned out the window. You have 2 weeks, Eliza. 2 weeks to prepare the children for transfer. The judge has already signed the preliminary order. Fight it if you want, but we both know how it will end. A poor widow with no prospects against a respected minister with means and position? The law isn't kind to women in your situation. The carriage pulled away, leaving Eliza standing in the dust with her children clustering around her and her world crumbling for the second time in 4 months. Mama? Sarah's voice was very small. Is he going to take us away? Eliza wanted to say no, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that she'd protect them, that no one could separate their family. But the document in Silas's hand had been real. The threat in his voice had been real, and she knew with sick certainty that he was right about one thing. The law would favor him over her. No, she said anyway, pulling her children close. He's not taking anyone anywhere. But even as she said it, she was trying to figure out how to make that promise true. They spent the rest of the day in a kind of shocked suspension, going through the motions of work while their minds spun with fear and desperate planning. Noah disappeared for hours, returning tight-lipped and furious. Sarah cried quietly while she churned butter. Even James, still regaining his strength, seemed to sense the wrongness in the air and stayed subdued. That night, after the children finally slept, Eliza sat at the table with the few legal documents Thomas had left behind, trying to make sense of claim laws and custody rights and territorial regulations. The words blurred together, a tangle of whereas and heretofore that might as well have been written in a foreign language. She was still there when dawn broke, no closer to answers than she'd been at midnight. Noah found her slumped over the papers, her head pillowed on her arms. "Ma." He shook her shoulder gently. "You need to sleep. I need to fix this." "How?" "He's got money, position, legal papers. What do we have?" Eliza raised her head, looking at her son's defeated face, and felt something crystallize inside her. She'd spent 4 months being practical, being resigned, accepting what life dealt her because that's what women were supposed to do. But this, losing her children to a man who'd never cared about them, who wanted them only to salve his own conscience or bolster his reputation, this she would not accept. "We have the truth," she said, "and we have someone who might help us fight." Noah's eyes widened. "You mean—" "Get dressed. We're going to town to find out how to reach the Rourke place." The ride to town took 2 hours in the wagon with their oldest horse, a sway-backed gelding Thomas had called steady for his reliable temperament, if not his speed. Eliza left Mary in charge of the younger children with strict instructions and set out with Noah as the sun climbed toward another brutal day. The town of Harper's Bend sat in a valley where 3 creeks converged, a collection of false-fronted buildings and ambitious dreams that had grown up around the stage route. Eliza hadn't been here since the week after the funeral, and she saw immediately that gossip had preceded her. Conversation stopped when she passed. Eyes followed her with that particular mixture of pity and judgment that made her skin crawl. The mercantile owner, Mr. Peterson, greeted her with carefully neutral courtesy. "Mrs. Hart, good to see you. How can I help you today?" "I need directions to the Rourke place." "Caleb Rourke." Peterson's eyebrows rose. "That's a good 20 miles north, up in the high country. Rough trail. You planning to ride out there?" "If I have to." "Might be easier to leave a message. He comes to town for supplies every few weeks. Due back any day now, actually." "I can't wait that long." Eliza met his eyes steadily. "Please, Mr. Peterson. It's important." Something in her face must have convinced him. He pulled out a scrap of paper and sketched a rough map, marking landmarks and trail junctions. "Follow Copper Creek north past the old stamp mill, then take the West Fork where the aspens start. You'll climb for about 2 hours. His cabin's in a meadow below the ridgeline. Can't miss it. But Mrs. Hart, it's wild country up there. Not safe for a woman alone. I'll have Noah with me." "The boy's 12. "The boy's all I've got." She took the map. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." As they turned to leave, a woman's voice cut across the store. "I heard about Reverend Hartwell's visit." Eliza turned to find Mrs. Graham, the banker's wife, watching her with sharp eyes. The woman had been at Thomas's funeral, had offered meaningless condolences, and then disappeared like everyone else. "News travels fast," Eliza said evenly. "Small town. And such an unusual situation." Mrs. Graham's tone was honey-sweet and poisonous. A minister seeking custody of his brother's children. One has to wonder what prompted such a drastic action. "One might wonder why a community let a widow and 5 children starve rather than offer help," Eliza replied. "But I suppose we all have our mysteries." Mrs. Graham's face flushed. "I'm sure if you'd asked for help—" "I did ask. I wrote letters. I sent messages. No one responded." Eliza felt Noah tense beside her, felt her own anger rising hot and righteous. "But the moment a single man showed me kindness, suddenly everyone has opinions about my character. Funny how that works." "Eliza, I understand you're upset. No, I don't think you do. I think you're comfortable in your nice house with your full pantry, and you like feeling superior to people who've fallen on hard times. It makes you feel better about doing nothing." The store had gone completely silent. Eliza could feel every eye on her, feel the weight of judgment and scandal and small-town propriety pressing down like the summer heat. "My husband was a good man," she continued, her voice carrying to every corner. "He worked himself to death trying to build something. And when he died, not one of you lifted a finger to help his children. So don't stand there in your silk dress and tell me you understand. You don't understand anything." She walked out before anyone could respond, Noah hurrying to keep pace. "Ma," he said once they were back in the wagon. "That was stupid?" Eliza gathered the reins. "Reckless? A perfect way to guarantee everyone in town thinks I'm unfit?" "I was going to say brave." She looked at her son, seeing pride in his face instead of the constant worry that had lived there for months. Something in her chest loosened. "Well, brave or stupid, we're committed now. Let's go find Caleb Rourke." The trail north was everything Peterson had warned it would be. Steep, rocky, threading through country that went from grassland to scrub pine to thick forest as they climbed. Steady lived up to his name, picking his way carefully over loose stones and fallen timber, while Eliza tried not to think about what would happen if they got lost, if they couldn't find the cabin, if Caleb wasn't even there. They climbed for 3 hours, the air growing noticeably cooler and thinner as they gained elevation. Noah walked ahead when the trail got too narrow for the wagon, checking for deadfalls and washouts, moving with the kind of focused competence that made Eliza's heart ache. He was so young to be this capable, this serious. Finally, as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks, they came over a rise and saw it. A meadow, green and perfect in the high country way, surrounded by dark pines and backed by gray granite cliffs. A cabin sat at the far edge, built of peeled logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Corrals held a dozen horses, their coats gleaming in the afternoon light. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady stream, and standing by the corral, curry brush in hand, was Caleb Rourke. He looked up as they approached, his expression shifting from surprise to concern in the space of a heartbeat. He set down the brush and walked to meet them, moving with that loose-limbed grace that somehow made him seem both relaxed and ready for anything. "Mrs. Hart." His eyes scanned them both, checking for injury or immediate crisis. "What's wrong?" Eliza climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky from the long ride and the relief of finally finding him. Now that she was here facing him, she didn't know how to begin. "We need help," she said simply. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a settling like a decision being made. "Come inside. You can tell me over coffee." The cabin was neat as a pin, everything in its place, walls lined with books and tools and the accumulated order of a solitary life carefully maintained. Caleb got the coffee going and set out bread and cheese while Eliza gathered her thoughts. When she finally told him about Silas's visit, about the custody petition and the 2-week deadline, Caleb listened without interrupting. His face remained neutral, but his hands on the coffee cup tightened until his knuckles went white. "A judge signed this?" he asked when she finished. "Preliminary order. Silas says it's as good as done." "Does this judge know the truth? That you've been managing the homestead? That the children are healthy and cared for?" "I don't know what Silas told him, but I know how it looks. A poor widow, alone, accepting help from a single man. In a town that size, reputation is everything." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "There's a way to fight this. Not easy, not comfortable, but effective. Tell me." He met her eyes. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying all at once. "What?" Eliza's voice came out as a whisper. "If you're married, legally, respectably married, Silas loses his case. He's arguing you're unfit because you're alone, because you can't provide stability. But a married woman with a husband who has means and property? That changes everything. But we barely know each other." "Doesn't matter. The law cares about appearance, not affection. And appearances say a married couple with a working homestead and livestock is better than a single woman struggling alone. Eliza's mind was spinning. You'd do that? Tie yourself to me and 5 children you don't know, just to spite a man you've never met? I'd do it to keep those kids with their mother, where they belong. Caleb's voice was steady. And I wouldn't be doing it for free. I need help come fall, and I could use a partner who knows how to work. You'd earn your keep, same as I offered before. Only difference is a piece of paper and a circuit judge saying some words. Caleb, I'm not asking for a real marriage, Eliza, not in the ways that count. You'd have your space, I'd have mine. We'd be partners in business, not... He stopped, his jaw working. You don't have to worry about me expecting anything beyond what you're willing to give. The offer was so carefully constructed, so deliberately safe, that Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. This man, this near stranger, was willing to upend his entire life to help her fight for her children. And he was doing it in a way that protected her dignity, her autonomy, her choice. Why? She asked again. Really why? Caleb looked away, his gaze distant. I told you before. Someone should have stopped for me once. Nobody did. And I learned what it's like to be alone when you shouldn't have to be. He turned back to her. Those kids need you. You need a fighting chance. I can give you that. Seems simple enough. Nothing about this is simple. No, he agreed, but it's better than the alternative. Eliza thought about Silas's cold smile, about losing Sarah and James and Mary and Benjamin and Noah to a man who saw them as obligations rather than people. She thought about 2 weeks ticking down to nothing, about courtrooms and judges and laws that didn't care about love or truth. And she thought about the man sitting across from her, who'd fixed her well and saved her son, and was now offering to become her husband for no better reason than because it was right. If we do this, she said slowly, it has to be clear to everyone that it's a marriage of practical necessity, not anything else. Agreed. And the children have to understand, especially Noah. We'll tell them together. And if it doesn't work, if Silas finds a way around it, or if living together isn't sustainable, Caleb's smile was slight but genuine. Then we deal with that when it comes. But I've got a feeling you and I are both too stubborn to fail at something once we've committed to it. Despite everything, Eliza felt herself smile back. You might be right about that. So is that a yes? She thought about all the things she was supposed to consider: reputation, propriety, what people would say. Then she thought about her children's faces and decided that nothing else mattered. Yes, she said. Let's get married and fight this son of a bitch together. Caleb extended his hand across the table. When Eliza took it, his grip was warm and solid and absolutely steady. Partners, he said. Partners, she agreed. And somewhere between the coffee and the handshake and the crazy, desperate plan they'd just agreed to, Eliza felt hope return like water finding its level, natural, inevitable, right. They rode back down the mountain as the sun painted the western peaks gold and crimson, Noah silent beside her in the wagon, while Eliza's mind raced through everything that needed to happen in the next 48 hours. Caleb had insisted on riding ahead to town at first light to arrange things with Judge Morrison, the circuit judge who happened to be in Harper's Bend for the week. The timing was either providence or pure luck, and Eliza had stopped caring which. You're really going to marry him, Noah said finally, his voice flat in the gathering dusk. Yes. You don't love him. No, but I love you and your brothers and sisters, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. She glanced at her son. Are you angry? Noah was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Pa's only been gone 4 months. I know. It feels wrong, like we're forgetting him. Eliza pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face Noah fully. Your father would want you fed. He'd want you safe. He'd want you with me, not scattered to wherever Silas decides to send you. And if it takes marrying a good man to make that happen, Thomas would be the first one to tell me to do it. How do you know he's good? You barely know him. I know he stopped when no one else did. I know he fixed what was broken and asked for nothing back. I know he's offering to turn his whole life upside down to help people who aren't his responsibility. She reached over and took Noah's hand. That's more than most men would do. It's enough for me to take a chance on. Noah's fingers tightened around hers. What if he changes? What if once you're married, he becomes different? Mean. It was the question Eliza had been avoiding, the fear that lived in the back of every woman's mind when she considered giving a man legal authority over her life. She'd seen it happen. Sweet courtships that turned sour after wedding vows, gentleness that became control, promises that became prisons. Then we leave, she said simply. I won't stay with a man who hurts me or you children, legal or not. But Noah, I don't think that's who he is. I've watched him, the way he moves, the way he talks, the way he treated James when he was sick. That's not a man who takes pleasure in power over others. You can't know that for sure. No, but I trust my instincts, and my instincts say he's safe. And right now, safe is what we need most. They arrived home well after dark to find the children still awake, clustered anxiously by the door. Sarah threw herself at Eliza before the wagon even stopped moving. We thought something happened. We thought maybe Uncle Silas came back or you got hurt or... We're fine, sweetheart. We're all fine. Eliza gathered her children close, breathing in the familiar smell of them, sun and dirt and home. Come inside. We need to talk. She told them everything, leaving nothing out. About Silas's custody petition, about the 2-week deadline, about the desperate ride to find Caleb and the solution he'd offered. The children listened with wide eyes and increasingly worried faces. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Finally, Mary spoke, her voice small. Are we going to have a new papa? No, honey. Mr. Rourke isn't trying to replace your father. He's just helping us stay together. We'll still be the same family, just with one more person in it. Will we have to leave, Benjamin asked. Will we have to go live in the mountains? Eliza looked at Noah, saw the same question in his eyes. It was something she and Caleb hadn't fully discussed. Logistics, living arrangements, the actual shape their lives would take after the wedding. I don't know yet, she admitted. We'll figure it out together, but wherever we are, we'll be together. That's what matters. I like Mr. Rourke, James said suddenly. He made me feel better when I was sick, and he talks to me like I'm a real person, not just a kid. He fixed our well, Sarah added, and he didn't get mad when Noah was mean to him. I wasn't mean, Noah protested. I was cautious. You pointed a knife at him. That was before I knew... Noah stopped, his jaw working. He's all right. For a stranger who's going to marry our mother for no good reason. The reason is you, Eliza said quietly. All of you. That's the only reason that matters. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day that promised to be brutal by noon. Eliza was up before sunrise, trying to figure out what a woman wore to a marriage of convenience. She settled on her best dress, dark blue calico that had seen better days but was at least clean and mended. Sarah helped her pin up her hair, fingers trembling with excitement, or nerves, or both. You look pretty, Mama, the girl whispered. I look terrified, Eliza corrected, but she smiled. Caleb arrived mid-morning, riding that same steady bay gelding and leading a second horse, a pretty sorrel mare with kind eyes and a calm disposition. Thought you might need better transportation than that old wagon, he said, dismounting. Her name's Clover, gentle as they come. He looked different today. Still wore the same work clothes, still had that weathered face and careful movements, but something had shifted in his bearing. Purpose, maybe. Or determination. Is everything arranged? Eliza asked. Judge Morrison will see us at 2:00. He wasn't pleased about the rush, but when I explained the situation, he agreed to perform the ceremony. Caleb's expression darkened. He also knows Silas Hartwell. Says the man's got a reputation for being more concerned with appearances than actual Christian charity. That sounds about right. Morrison says he'll want to see the children afterward, talk to them, make sure they're healthy, and want to stay with you. But if they confirm what we're saying, he'll void Silas's petition on the spot. Relief flooded through Eliza so powerfully, her knees went weak. Just like that? Just like that. The law favors intact families with means. Once we're married and he sees the kids are fine, Silas loses his case. Caleb glanced at the children, who were watching from the doorway with varying expressions of curiosity and anxiety. You told them? Last night. They have questions, but they understand why we're doing this. And they're all right with it? They're scared and confused and trying to be brave. Same as us. Caleb nodded, then walked toward the house. Noah stepped forward to meet him, positioning himself between Caleb and the younger children in a gesture that was both protective and challenging. Mr. Rourke. Noah. Caleb stopped a respectful distance away. I know this is strange. I know it's fast. And I know you've got no reason to trust me beyond what you've seen. So I'm going to make you a promise, right here in front of your whole family. He knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with the children, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. I'm not trying to replace your father. I'm not trying to make you forget him or pretend he didn't matter. I'm just trying to help your mother keep you all together because that's what families are supposed to be. Together. He looked at each child in turn. I won't hurt you. I won't hurt her. And if any of you ever feel unsafe or unhappy, you can tell me and we'll fix it. That's my word, and I keep my word. Always. Sarah was the first to move, stepping forward and placing her small hand on Caleb's shoulder. Thank you for helping us, she said solemnly. You're welcome, Sarah. One by one, the other children moved closer, even Benjamin, who was usually shy around strangers. Only Noah held back, his face unreadable. I'm going to hold you to that promise, the boy said finally. All of it. Good. You should. Caleb stood, extending his hand. A man's only as good as his word. You remind me of that if I ever forget. They shook, and Eliza saw some of the tension leave Noah's shoulders. The ride to town took 2 hours, all 7 of them making a small parade, Caleb and Eliza on horseback. The children crowded into the wagon that Noah drove with careful concentration. As they descended from the high country, the heat intensified, but Eliza barely noticed. Her mind was too busy cataloging everything that could go wrong, every way this plan could fail. What if Judge Morrison changed his mind? What if Silas had already convinced him that Eliza was unfit? What if the marriage wasn't enough, if there were other legal requirements they hadn't considered? You're thinking too hard, Caleb said quietly, riding alongside her. I can hear it from here. I'm thinking the right amount for someone about to marry a stranger to fight a custody battle. Fair enough. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I don't take this lightly. What we're doing today, it might start as a piece of paper, but it's still a commitment. I meant what I said to the children. I keep my word. I believe you. And surprisingly, she did. After this is done, after we've dealt with Morrison and Silas, we should talk about the practical side. Where everyone will live, how to manage 2 properties, what the day-to-day looks like. I don't want you or the kids feeling like you're at my mercy. I appreciate that. I've been alone a long time, Eliza. I'm not used to sharing space or making decisions with someone else. I'll probably be difficult without meaning to be. I've been managing 5 children alone for 4 months. I can handle difficult. His smile was quick but genuine. I expect you can. Harper's Bend was busy when they arrived, the main street crowded with wagons and horses and people going about their weekly business. Eliza felt eyes follow them as they made their way to the courthouse, felt the weight of curiosity and judgment and gossip already spreading like wildfire. Let them talk, she thought. Let them say whatever they want. My children are staying with me, and that's all that matters. Judge Morrison's office was on the 2nd floor of the courthouse, a stuffy room lined with law books and smelling of old paper and tobacco. The judge himself was a solid man in his 60s, with gray mutton chops and shrewd eyes that took in every detail as they entered. Mrs. Hart, Mr. Rourke, he gestured to the chairs facing his desk. The children can wait outside with my clerk. This won't take long. Once they were seated, Morrison leaned back and studied them both. I've reviewed Reverend Hartwell's petition, he said without preamble, and I've made some inquiries of my own. The picture he painted of your situation doesn't match what I'm hearing from others in town. What did he tell you? Eliza asked. That you were destitute, possibly immoral, exposing the children to inappropriate influences and unable to provide basic necessities. Morrison's expression was neutral, but something in his voice suggested he didn't quite believe it. Is any of that true? I was struggling, Eliza said carefully. My husband died unexpectedly, leaving debts and an unfinished homestead. I've been working to keep things going, but it's been difficult. As for the rest, I've accepted help from Mr. Rourke here, who has been nothing but respectful and proper. If that's considered immoral, then the standards of morality need examining. And now you wish to marry him? Yes. Awfully convenient timing. Yes, Eliza repeated, meeting his eyes steadily. It is, but that doesn't make it less genuine. Mr. Rourke has offered partnership and stability. I've offered honest work and help managing his property. It's a practical arrangement that serves both our interests and provides a stable home for my children. Morrison turned to Caleb. And you, Mr. Rourke? You're willing to take on a ready-made family of 5 children just like that? I am. Why? Caleb's jaw tightened. Because it's the right thing to do. Because those children belong with their mother. And because I've got the means to help, so I should. That simple? That's simple. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he sighed. Reverend Hartwell came to me 3 days ago with quite a different story. Painted himself as a concerned uncle trying to rescue children from poverty and neglect. But I've been a judge for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize when someone's more concerned with appearing righteous than actually being it. He pulled out a form. I'll perform the marriage ceremony, and afterward, I'll speak with the children. If they're healthy and want to stay with you, and I suspect they will be and do, I'll void the custody petition immediately. Relief hit Eliza like a physical wave. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Marriage is a serious business, even when it's entered into for practical reasons. You're committing to a legal partnership that won't be easy to dissolve if things go wrong. Are you both certain about this? Eliza looked at Caleb. He looked back, his gray-blue eyes steady and sure. Yes, they said together. Morrison stood. Then, let's get this done before Reverend Hartwell gets wind of it and tries to cause trouble. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, stripped of all romance and sentimentality. Morrison read the legal requirements, asked the necessary questions, accepted their affirmative responses. There were no rings, no kiss, no pronouncement about love and cherishing. Just 2 people making a binding agreement to face the future as legal partners. When it was done, Morrison handed them a marriage certificate with ink still wet on the signatures. You're now man and wife in the eyes of the law. Congratulations, I suppose. He looked at Eliza. Bring the children in. Let's finish this. The children filed in nervously, clustering close to Eliza. Morrison's demeanor softened immediately when he saw them. Nothing to be afraid of, he said kindly. I just want to ask you some questions. Make sure you're all doing all right. Can you tell me your names? One by one, they introduced themselves. Morrison asked gentle questions. Did they have enough to eat? Were they being treated well? Did they want to stay with their mother? The answers came clear and unhesitating. Yes, they were fed. Yes, they were safe. Yes, they wanted to stay together as a family. When Morrison asked James about being sick, the boy said, Mr. Rourke saved me. He took me to the doctor when I couldn't breathe good, and now I'm all better. Mr. Rourke is going to be part of your family now. How do you feel about that? James considered seriously. I think it's good. He's nice, and Mama smiles more when he's around. Eliza felt her face heat, but when she glanced at Caleb, he was looking at James with an expression she couldn't quite read. After questioning all 5 children, Morrison sat back and nodded. Well, Mrs. Rourke, he emphasized the name slightly, I see no evidence of neglect or unfitness. Your children are clearly healthy, well cared for, and devoted to you. I'll be filing an order today dismissing Reverend Hartwell's petition in its entirety. He pulled out his pen and began writing. Furthermore, I'll be making note that any future custody challenges will be viewed with extreme skepticism given the baseless nature of this one. What if he tries again? Noah asked. What if he doesn't accept this? Then he'll have to explain to me why he's wasting the court's time, Morrison said firmly. I don't take kindly to people who use the law to pursue personal vendettas. And that's what this was. A man trying to punish his sister-in-law for not living the way he thought she should. He finished writing and stamped the document with an official seal. There, it's done. You're free to go home, all of you together, and Reverend Hartwell can take his righteous indignation elsewhere. They were halfway down the courthouse steps when a familiar voice cut through the afternoon heat. "Eliza!" Silas Hartwell stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been genuine shock. "I heard the most extraordinary rumor," he said, his voice tight, "that you've gotten married, today, to some backwoods nobody. Tell me it isn't true." "It's true." Eliza descended the steps slowly, Caleb at her side, children clustered behind them. "I'm Mrs. Caleb Rourke now, and Judge Morrison has dismissed your petition." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that it was baseless, cruel, and a waste of the court's time." She stopped on the last step, eye to eye with her former brother-in-law. "You never cared about these children, Silas. You cared about appearances, about being seen as charitable, about having a righteous story to tell your congregation. I cared about doing what Thomas would have wanted. Thomas would have wanted his children safe and loved and together, that's all. Not raised by a man who saw them as obligations or trophies, just safe and loved and together." Silas's eyes cut to Caleb. "And you think this man can provide that? A stranger who appeared out of nowhere?" "I think he's already provided more care in 3 weeks than you did in 4 months, Eliza said quietly. "And I think Thomas would shake his hand and thank him for stopping when no one else would." "You've made a terrible mistake," Silas said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Marrying in haste, trusting a man you don't know. This will end badly, Eliza." "Maybe," Caleb said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm but carried an edge that made Silas step back slightly. "Or maybe it'll end with 5 kids growing up loved and safe instead of scattered to wherever you decided to send them. Either way, it's not your concern anymore." He placed a hand on the small of Eliza's back, just a light touch, but it steadied her. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." They walked past Silas together, a strange new family bound by paper and promises and the simple determination to survive. Behind them, Eliza could feel her former brother-in-law's stare, could imagine his frustration and wounded pride. She didn't care. The children piled into the wagon, chattering with relief now that the fear had passed. Noah took the reins, sitting a little taller than he had that morning. Caleb helped Eliza mount Clover, his hands careful and respectful. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm married to a man I barely know. I just faced down my dead husband's brother, and I have no idea what comes next." She looked at him, this stranger who was now her husband. "But my children are safe, so yes, I'm all right." "Good." He swung onto his own horse. "Now comes the hard part." "What hard part?" "I thought we just finished the hard part." "That was the legal battle. Now we have to figure out how to actually live together. That's going to take more than a judge's signature." He was right, of course. The marriage certificate in her pocket meant they were legally bound, but it didn't answer any of the practical questions about what their lives would look like day to day. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb said, "I've been thinking about it. The homestead's closer to town, better for the kids to eventually get schooling, and you've got 4 months of work invested in those crops such as they are. Seems foolish to abandon all that. So you'd move down from the high country? I'd split time, keep the cabin for horse work and winter trapping, but base mostly at your place, our place, during growing season. Make improvements, get the operation stable." He glanced at her. "If that's acceptable to you." "You'd give up your privacy, your solitude, for us?" "I'd trade it for partnership and purpose. Those things were in short supply before you showed up." The journey back to the homestead took most of the afternoon. As they crested the last rise and saw the little sod house sitting in its valley, looking shabby and worn but undeniably home, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. This morning she'd been Eliza Hart, desperate widow fighting to keep her children. Tonight she was Eliza Rourke, legally bound to a man she was only beginning to know, with a future that was uncertain but at least possible. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Caleb helped unhitch the wagon while the children scattered to their evening chores, moving with the kind of relieved energy that comes after tension finally breaks. Eliza stood in the doorway of the house, her house, their house now, and watched her new husband work. He moved with that same quiet competence she'd noticed from the beginning, neither rushed nor slow, just steady, purposeful. When the horses were settled and the wagon secured, he walked over to where she stood. "Long day," he said. "The longest. You should rest. We both should." "Where will you sleep?" The question came out more uncertain than she intended. "Barn's fine. I've slept in worse." "Caleb, you can't sleep in the barn. You just married me. People will talk." "People are already talking. And I made you a promise. You'd have your space. I meant it. There's a difference between keeping that promise and sleeping in a barn like you're not welcome in your own house." Eliza took a breath. "We have 2 beds. The children share one. I use the other. You can take mine. I'll make a pallet by the fire." "Eliza, it's practical. We're supposed to be a married couple. Having you sleep in the barn makes it look like this is a sham, which gives Silas ammunition if he decides to cause more trouble." She met his eyes. "And it's not a sham. It might not be conventional, but it's real. You're really my husband now. You deserve to sleep under a real roof." Caleb was quiet, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "I'll take the pallet," he said finally. "You keep the bed. We could—" "Eliza." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know what I promised, and I know what people might say. But you've been through enough today without adding one more uncomfortable thing. Keep your bed. I'll be fine by the fire." There was no arguing with that tone. Eliza nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. That night, lying in her bed with her children breathing softly nearby and her new husband stretched out by the dying fire, Eliza stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had changed in a single day. She was married again. To a good man, maybe even a great one, but still a stranger in so many ways. They'd bound their lives together out of necessity and mutual benefit. But what would that actually mean when the crisis passed and they were left with the everyday reality of sharing space and decisions and the slow accumulation of ordinary days? From the darkness came Caleb's voice, quiet enough not to wake the children. "Eliza, you asleep?" "No." "Me neither?" A pause. "Thank you for trusting me. I know that wasn't easy. Thank you for giving me something to trust." Another pause, longer this time. "We're going to be all right," he said. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I believe it. We're going to figure this out." "How can you be so sure?" "Because we both want it to work, and that's more than most marriages start with." He was probably right. Most marriages started with romance and hope and stars in the eyes, not legal maneuvering and custody battles. But most marriages also started between people who had more than 3 weeks of acquaintance. Still, as Eliza finally drifted towards sleep, she found herself believing him. They would figure it out. They had to. Because the alternative, going back to being alone, being vulnerable, being at the mercy of people like Silas who saw crisis as opportunity, was unthinkable now. She'd taken the gamble, made the choice, married the stranger. Now came the part where they learned to be something more. Morning came with the kind of golden light that made promises seem possible. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, sounds that had been absent from her mornings for so long she'd almost forgotten what they felt like. She sat up to find Caleb already dressed and working at the stove, moving quietly to avoid waking the children. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder. "Seemed like a good way to start. Besides, I'm used to cooking for myself. One more mouth isn't much different than 6. 6 mouths is considerably different than 1, and you know it." His smile was brief but genuine. "Maybe, but I figure we're all going to have to adjust to new rhythms. Might as well start now." Over the next week, those new rhythms began to take shape in ways both expected and surprising. Caleb moved some of his belongings down from the high country cabin. Tools, clothes, books that Eliza was startled to discover included poetry and philosophy, alongside practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture. He worked alongside Noah to shore up the sagging barn, teaching the boy proper joinery and the importance of planning before executing. He spent patient hours with James, letting the still recovering child follow him around, asking endless questions about horses and mountains and what it was like to live alone. With the girls, he was gentler still, never pushing, but always available. Sarah appointed herself his assistant in the kitchen, learning to make biscuits that rose properly and coffee that didn't taste like mud. Mary showed him her collection of interesting rocks, and he identified each one with geological precision that delighted her. Even Benjamin, the shyest of the children, began leaving small gifts on Caleb's bedroll: a pretty feather, a smooth stone, a clumsy drawing of a horse. And with Eliza, he was unfailingly respectful, asking before changing anything, discussing decisions rather than dictating them, giving her space while somehow always being present when she needed help she was too proud to ask for. It should have felt awkward, this sudden cohabitation with a near stranger. Instead, it felt like puzzle pieces finding their proper places, not without effort, but with a rightness that surprised them both. 2 weeks after the wedding, Doc Harrison made a house call to check on James. He found the boy running circles around the yard with Benjamin, lungs clear and energy fully restored. "Whatever you're doing is working," the doctor said, accepting the coffee Eliza offered. "He's healthier than I've seen him in months. Good food, clean water, less stress. It all makes a difference." "We've had help," Eliza said, watching Caleb demonstrate proper axe technique to Noah by the woodpile. Harrison followed her gaze. "I heard about the marriage. Also heard Silas Hartwell left town in quite a state, muttering about impropriety and hasty decisions. Judge Morrison made it clear his petition was unwelcome. Morrison's a good man, doesn't suffer fools, and Silas Hartwell is a first-class fool dressed up in preacher's clothing." Harrison sipped his coffee. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Caleb Rourke's got a reputation as a fair man. Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest as the day is long. That counts for more than romance in the long run." After the doctor left, Eliza found herself thinking about his words. Romance hadn't been part of their agreement, and she'd been carefully maintaining the boundaries they'd established. Separate sleeping spaces, formal courtesies, the emotional distance of business partners rather than spouses. But somewhere in the daily routines of cooking together and working side by side and watching Caleb interact with her children, something had begun to shift. She noticed small things. The way he always made sure she ate before declaring a meal finished. How he'd reinforced the rickety chair she favored without mentioning it. The careful way he asked her opinion on everything from where to plant next season's crops to whether they should acquire more chickens. He treated her like a partner, in fact, not just on paper, and it had been so long since anyone treated her as an equal that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. One evening, as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Caleb broke the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about the homestead claim," he said. "You're behind on the fees, and with everything else that's happened, you probably haven't had time to file the improvement documentation." Eliza's stomach tightened. "No, I haven't. I kept meaning to, but you were busy trying to keep everyone alive." "I understand." He was quiet for a moment. "If we don't file soon, you could lose the claim entirely. All of Thomas's work gone to whoever files next." "I know, I just don't have the money for the fees." "We do, though. We're married. What's mine is yours, legally speaking. And I've got enough set aside to cover the fees and file the improvements jointly under both our names." He glanced at her. "If that's acceptable to you." "Caleb, that's your money, your security. I can't ask you to eat." "You're not asking. I'm offering, and it's not just charity. A proven homestead with water rights and buildings is worth considerably more than raw land. It's a good investment, and it protects us both." His voice softened. "Besides, those improvements include the well I fixed and the barn Noah and I are rebuilding. Seems only fair my name should be on the claim, too." It made practical sense, but Eliza heard what he wasn't saying, that by putting his name on the claim, he was committing to this place, to her, to the children, in a way that went beyond a marriage certificate signed under duress. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you. We're partners, Eliza. That means we face these things together." The next week, they rode to the land office together and filed the necessary papers. The clerk who processed them was the same man who'd handled Thomas's original claim, and his eyebrows rose when he saw Caleb's name alongside Eliza's. Heard you got married, he said, not unkindly. Congratulations, Mrs. Rourke. The name still felt strange, but less strange than it had 2 weeks ago. Eliza accepted the filed documents and the receipt for the fees, feeling a weight lift that she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. On the ride home, she said, I never properly thanked you for everything, the marriage, the money, the work, all of it. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You changed your entire life for people who were nothing to you. That deserves recognition. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hands easy on the reins. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was picking his way through difficult terrain. You weren't nothing to me. From the moment I saw you collapsed in that dirt, trying so hard to be strong when you had nothing left, you mattered. All of you mattered. He paused. I spent 15 years alone because people hurt me, and I decided solitude was safer than trust. But watching you fight for your children, watching Noah try to be a man when he should still be a boy, watching those little ones go hungry because the world's not fair, it reminded me that loneliness isn't safety. It's just another kind of prison. What happened to you? Eliza asked softly. What hurt you so badly you chose 15 years alone? He didn't answer right away, and she thought he might not. Then, slowly, he began to talk. I had a wife once. Her name was Rebecca. We married young, built a place down in Colorado Territory, had a daughter. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. There was a winter fever that went through. Took Rebecca first, then Caroline a week later. She was 3 years old. Eliza's breath caught. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I buried them both on a Tuesday. By Friday, Rebecca's family was at my door, telling me it was my fault. That if I'd been a better provider, could have afforded a real doctor instead of the circuit medicine man, they'd still be alive. He looked straight ahead, his jaw tight. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have done more, been more. All I know is I couldn't stay there, couldn't keep living in that house with their ghosts and everyone's judgment. So I packed what I could carry and rode north until I found country empty enough that I could breathe again. How long ago? 15 years this past March. 15 years of carrying that grief alone, of believing he'd failed the people he loved most. Eliza understood then why he'd stopped for her that day, why he'd kept coming back, why he'd been willing to upend his solitary life for a widow and 5 children he barely knew. You didn't fail them, she said firmly. Fever takes who it takes. Money doesn't stop death when death's decided to come. I know that now. Took me a long time to know it, though. He glanced at her. And before you ask, no, this isn't about replacing what I lost. You're not Rebecca, and your children aren't Caroline. This is about choosing to live again instead of just existing. There's a difference. Yes, Eliza agreed quietly. There is. They rode in silence for a while, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Deeper, more honest, the kind that comes from understanding rather than mere proximity. As summer deepened, the homestead began to transform. The crops Caleb had helped Eliza plant came in better than expected, providing food for the table and surplus to sell in town. The barn stood straight and true, its new roof shedding rain instead of leaking it. The well continued to produce clean water, and Caleb had rigged a simple irrigation system that kept the kitchen garden thriving despite the heat. But the real transformation was in the people. James grew strong and healthy, his laughter ringing across the yard as he played. Benjamin lost his anxious quiet, becoming more talkative as security replaced fear. Mary started a new rock collection, this one organized with scientific precision after Caleb taught her proper geological classification. Sarah bloomed under the attention of having enough food and a stable home, her natural leadership emerging as she organized her siblings into efficient work crews. And Noah changed most of all. The desperate vigilance eased from his shoulders. The knife he'd carried constantly was set aside. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, and began to show flashes of the boy he should have been all along. Caleb worked with him daily, teaching him skills that would serve him well as he grew: carpentry, animal husbandry, how to read weather and land, and the subtle signs that separated good decisions from disasters. One afternoon, Eliza overheard them talking by the corral. You miss him? Caleb asked. his voice carrying across the yard. Your father? Every day, Noah said. But it's different now. It doesn't hurt as much. That's good. Means you're healing. Doesn't mean you're forgetting. Ma says you had a family once, that they died. That's true. Do you still miss them? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Every day. But like you said, it's different now. The missing is part of me, not the whole of me. Does it ever stop hurting completely? No, but it stops being the only thing you feel. That's enough. Eliza turned away from the window, her vision blurred with tears. This man who'd been a stranger 2 months ago was teaching her son how to grieve properly, how to honor the past while still living in the present. It was a gift she couldn't have anticipated and couldn't begin to repay. That night, after the children were asleep, she found Caleb on the porch as had become their habit. He was working on a piece of leather, creating what looked like a new bridle for one of the horses. Noah told me about your conversation, she said, settling into the chair beside him. He's a good kid, carrying too much, but learning to set it down. Because of you. Because of time and safety and knowing he doesn't have to be the man of the house anymore. Caleb's hand stilled on the leather. I like him, Eliza. All of them, really. They're good children. Thomas did well by them before he died. You did well by them after. We're doing well by them now. The words hung between them, simple but significant. We. Not you and me separately, but together. Caleb looked at her, something shifting in those storm cloud eyes. Are we? Doing well, I mean? I think so. Don't you? I think we've managed to build something functional out of necessity, but I also think... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I think somewhere along the way it stopped being just functional, at least for me. Eliza's heart kicked against her ribs. What do you mean? I mean, I wake up in the morning and I'm glad to be here. I hear the children laughing and it makes something in my chest feel less empty. I watch you working in the garden and I think about how strong you are, how brave, how you kept fighting when anyone else would have quit. He set down the bridle, turning to face her fully. I mean, this stopped being a marriage of convenience for me about 3 weeks ago, and I don't know what to do about it. The confession should have frightened her, should have made her want to retreat behind the safe boundaries they'd established. Instead, Eliza felt something warm and bright unfurl in her chest. When did you know? She asked. The day you stood up to Silas on the courthouse steps. You were terrified, I could see it. But you did it anyway, because your children needed you to be brave. And I thought, this is a woman worth more than a piece of paper and a business arrangement. I knew earlier than that, Eliza admitted. The morning after the wedding, when I woke up to coffee already made and you cooking breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like taking care of us wasn't a burden, but a choice you were happy to make. So what do we do about it? It was the question Eliza had been avoiding for weeks, afraid of the answer, afraid of wanting too much. Afraid of risking the fragile stability they'd built. I don't know, she said honestly. I love Thomas. I'm not sure I know how to love anyone else. I'm not asking you to love me the way you loved him. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Caleb reached across the space between them, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. An offer, not a demand. I'm just saying I'd like to try being more than business partners. More than roommates who happen to be legally married, if you're willing. Eliza looked at his outstretched hand, at the calluses and scars that told stories of hard work and harder years. She thought about everything he'd done, everything he'd given, everything he'd been without asking for anything in return. Then she thought about what she wanted, independent of gratitude or obligation or practical necessity. She wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted to see if the partnership they'd built could become something deeper, richer, more honest than either of them had expected. She placed her hand in his. I'm willing, she said, but slow. I need slow. Slow I can do. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. I've spent 15 years alone. I'm not going anywhere. They sat like that as the stars wheeled overhead, hands linked, a new understanding settling between them like dust after a storm. The change was subtle but profound. Caleb moved from the pallet by the fire to sharing Eliza's bed, though they maintained careful space between them at first, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. It took another week before Eliza woke to find herself curled against his side, his arm wrapped protectively around her, and instead of pulling away, she let herself stay. The children noticed, of course. Children always noticed. But instead of confusion or resentment, they seemed pleased, as if this was what they'd been hoping for all along. "Does this mean Mr. Rourke is really our PA now?" James asked one morning at breakfast. Caleb looked at Eliza, the question in his eyes. "That's up to you," she told the children. "He's my husband, and he's committed to being part of this family. What you call him is your choice." "I'm going to call him Pa," James decided immediately. "That's okay, right? Even though I had another Pa before?" "More than okay," Eliza said, her throat tight. "Your first father would be glad you have someone to look after you." One by one, the younger children followed suit. Pa for James and Benjamin, Father for the more formal Mary, Papa for Sarah, who liked the old-fashioned sound of it. Only Noah held out, still calling him Caleb, though the wariness had been replaced by something closer to respect. "You don't have to call me anything you're not comfortable with," Caleb told the boy one afternoon. "I'm not trying to replace your father." "I know, but he was my pa, and I'm not ready to give that name to someone else yet." "That's fair. Take all the time you need." It was another month before Noah, frustrated with a piece of woodwork that wouldn't cooperate, called across the yard. "Pa, can you help me with this?" Then he stopped, his face flushing. "I mean, Caleb, I didn't mean—" Caleb just smiled and walked over to examine the problem. "This joint needs more angle. Here, let me show you." After that, it was Pa more often than not, though Noah still used Caleb when he needed to maintain some distance, some connection to the father he'd lost. As summer faded into autumn, they received word that Silas Hartwell had accepted a position at a church in St. Louis, as far from Wyoming territory as he could get while remaining respectable. The news came via a terse letter that managed to be both congratulatory and condescending, wishing them well while making it clear he still thought they'd made a terrible mistake. "Good riddance," Noah said, and for once Eliza didn't correct his tone. The harvest that year was modest but sufficient, providing enough to see them through the winter with some left over to sell. Caleb brought down 3 of his best horses to sell at the autumn stock sale. And between the crops and the livestock, they had actual money. Not wealth, but enough to pay down Thomas's remaining debts and put something aside for emergencies. The night after the sale, Caleb came to bed and handed Eliza a small cloth bag. "What's this?" she asked. "Your share of the horse sale, minus what went to the homestead expenses and savings." Eliza opened the bag to find more money than she'd seen in a year. "Caleb, this is too much. Those were your horses." "Those were our horses, raised on our land, sold to benefit our family. You've earned this, Eliza, every penny of it." She stared at the money, then at him, understanding fully for the first time that this wasn't temporary, wasn't conditional, wasn't going to disappear the moment she stopped being useful. "You really mean that," she said. "The hour, the we, all of it." "I really mean it." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "I know this started as a practical arrangement, but it's become the best decision I've ever made. You and the children, you're my family now, really and truly." Eliza kissed him then, properly, for the first time since the perfunctory kiss at their wedding. It was tentative at first, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory, but it deepened into something real and present and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was smiling, a true smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I've been waiting for you to do that," he admitted. "I've been trying to work up the courage." "And now that you have? Now I'm thinking maybe we should do it again." They did, and it was even better the second time. Winter came to Wyoming territory with its usual fierce intensity, but this year the Hart Rourke homestead was ready. They had firewood stacked high, food in the cellar, livestock in the reinforced barn, and a house that no longer leaked heat through 100 gaps in the walls. Caleb had spent weeks improving the insulation, adding a second room for the older boys, creating space for everyone to have some privacy. On the first real snowfall, the children ran outside to play, their delighted shouts echoing across the white landscape. Eliza stood at the window watching them, Caleb's arms wrapped around her from behind. "Happy?" he asked quietly. She leaned back against his chest. "Yes, genuinely, surprisingly happy." "Good, because I have something to tell you." The seriousness in his voice made her turn to face him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I need you to know this isn't just about the children anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." He took her hands. "I love you, Eliza, not because you needed saving, not because it was the right thing to do, but because you're brave and strong and stubborn and kind. Because you make me laugh. Because you challenge me. Because coming home to you feels like the first real home I've had in 15 years. Tears blurred her vision. "I love you too. I didn't think I could, not so soon after Thomas, but I do. It's different than what I felt for him, but it's real. Different is good. Different means it's ours." She kissed him again, tasting snow and coffee and the future they were building together. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing green shoots and new possibilities. Eliza discovered she was pregnant on a warm April morning, the realization hitting her with a mixture of joy and terror. When she told Caleb, he went very still. "Are you happy about it?" he asked carefully. "I think so. Are you?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "After losing Caroline, the thought of going through that again. We'll face it together, whatever comes." He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "A baby. Our baby." "Our baby," she confirmed, and felt him smile against her temple. The children were ecstatic when they learned, already planning names and arguing about whether a brother or sister would be better. Noah, now 14 and shooting up like a weed, appointed himself the baby's protector before it was even born. "Nobody's going to hurt this one," he declared. "Not ever." The baby came in late November, a healthy boy with Caleb's gray eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas Caleb Rourke, honoring the past while acknowledging the present. Caleb held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I'd never have this again," he whispered. "Thought I didn't deserve it." "You deserve every bit of happiness you can hold," Eliza told him, "and then some." 2 years after that scorching summer day when Eliza had collapsed in the dirt and a stranger had stopped to help, the homestead was thriving. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The crops came in consistently. Caleb's horse breeding operation had earned a reputation for quality throughout the territory. The children were healthy, happy, growing like weeds and dreaming their own dreams. And Eliza, watching her husband teach their youngest how to identify animal tracks in the snow, while their older children worked together to build a snowman that kept collapsing, understood something profound. The day she fell, she thought it was the end. The moment when her body finally gave out and she had nothing left to give. But it had actually been a beginning, not just of her relationship with Caleb, but of understanding that asking for help wasn't weakness, that accepting kindness wasn't failure, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most desperate moments, if you were brave enough to reach for them when they appeared. That night, as they lay together in the bed they now shared without hesitation or uncertainty, Caleb said, "Do you ever think about that first day, when I rode up and found you in the dirt?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I almost didn't stop. I saw the homestead from the ridge and thought about riding past, minding my own business like I'd done for 15 years. His arm tightened around her. "Makes me sick to think what would have happened if I had." "But you didn't. You stopped." "Best decision I ever made." Eliza shifted to look at him in the dim light from the banked fire. "For both of us. You saved more than my life that day, Caleb. You saved all of us, gave us a future we wouldn't have had otherwise. We gave each other a future. That's how partnerships work." She kissed him, slow and sweet, tasting the truth of those words. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the plains, but inside the Hart Rourke homestead, all was warm and safe and exactly as it should be. 7 children slept soundly. 5 who'd learned that family could expand to include someone who started as a stranger, and 1 whose existence was proof that second chances could become something beautiful, and 1 more on the way because hope, once rekindled, had a way of multiplying. Eliza fell asleep in her husband's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and dreamed of summer days and growing children and a life built on choices made in desperation that had become something neither of them could have imagined. Sometimes the best love stories didn't start with romance. Sometimes they started with a woman at the end of her rope and a man who'd forgotten how to hope, both of them brave enough to take a chance on partnership when the world offered no other options. And sometimes those stories ended with everything both of them had stopped believing they deserved: safety, love, family, and the quiet joy of ordinary days lived together. The dust had settled, both literally and figuratively, and in its place had grown something strong enough to weather any storm the territory could throw at them. Together.